Yeah, no, I'm Hal. I've just been in grad school at the University of Warwick. I'll actually be doing a PhD at Warwick as well. So I'm glad about that. And that's over the next few months. And I guess I pay attention to a lot of things, pay attention to news, pay attention to developments in the media. I have a silly Substack that I don't post on much, but I post on the Titanic situation recently.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, I just quickly, it would be cool to get into that, and then of course this sudden breaking news, which I think Kevin might have something to say about because geopolitics seems to be his beat with Wagner Group and whatnot. Sure. But yeah, I don't want to get too off script too quick. We'd finish with the bios if you want to say more, Hal. Sorry.
No, nothing to say here.
Okay.
So I'm Kevin. I grew up in the Bay Area. Ended up becoming an architect. Married a Swedish woman and moved to Europe. And so recently, with COVID, I kind of went into semi-retirement. But I've always been interested in economics, geopolitics, philosophy, all these issues. And I used to kind of comment a lot on blogs. And so this year I started a Substack. And it's been really great. It's just very motivating every week to find a new subject and talk about it, particularly with the war in Ukraine and multipolarity, and kind of the economic shifts that are happening now. And so, and I live in Brussels, Belgium, and I'm 60. So I'm probably the oldest of us.
Cool, from the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm from the Bay Area. Born in San Francisco, grew up in San Leandro, of all places.
Wow.
So,
I was actually born in San Francisco too. I just didn't live there very long.
There's not many. There's not many. Well, I don't know that many people. Everyone who lives in San Francisco wasn't born there for sure, or very few.
Yeah, it's even more than New York. You know, it's not particularly rooted. I mean, that is to say, New York has more rootedness, but it's still obviously identified with the place that strivers head to from anywhere USA or anywhere in the world. But yeah,
exactly.
running into someone from San Francisco who was born and raised there is rare.
Yeah.
But yeah, Heghoulian, do you want to chime in?
Okay, yes, I'm Heghoulian. Regular listeners will have learnt to tolerate me by now, I guess. But for anyone who doesn't know who I am, so I've been on Twitter for about 5 years. I didn't start off with the name Heghoulian. I was right modernist to begin with. Later I became, I think, was it a non sequitur? And now I'm Heghoulian. And I also have a Substack, which has the title of Some Private Diagonal, which is a sort of a Ballard reference. I often post about Ballard, and the Substack is sort of concerned with modernity, modernism, philosophy, literature, a lot of literature stuff there. It's not something I post to sort of every week like some writers do, but when I do post, I try to make it a kind of a worthwhile event for my subscribers. So I put a lot into those posts. So I just posted something yesterday. Anyway, but leave that aside for a moment. So I'm from Wales, in fact. So I'm the only non-American here. As usual, outnumbered on this show. And I now live, though, in Poland. I've lived here for over a decade. Specifically, I live in Małopolska, which translates to Little Poland or Lesser Poland, which is it's sort of a province in the south. So I sort of live in the foothills of the Tatra Mountains, yeah, that's basically it, I think.
That's interesting. Little Poland sounds like a neighborhood somewhere in the U.S. in a major city, but there's a Little Poland in Poland. That's funny.
That's right. Yeah, it's considered one of the more conservative parts of Poland, actually, sort of, heavily sort of slanted towards the peace, the sort of law and justice party translates to, which is currently in power. Probably the most Catholic part of Poland, alongside maybe the easternmost provinces are heavily Catholic also. But yeah, and the capital is Krakow, which a city I used to live in and regularly go back to, of course, various reasons. Now I live in a village, really, sort of with my family, as we are revealing our ages, so I'm sort of mid-40s, so that's me.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some sort of tendency for the east side of countries to be more conservative. I mean, East Germany is more conservative, from what I understand. East Poland. Now in the U.S., the south and the center of the country is thought to be more conservative, and it's true. But if it's east versus west, the East Coast is more rooted than the West Coast. West Coast is a lot of very individualist, nomadic sort of approach to life, and sort of cultivates the cult of entrepreneurship. Sort of clunky way of putting it, but yeah. But that's interesting about the east side of Poland being a little more conservative.
Yeah, actually, there's some maps that you can check out. I saw some on Twitter showing things like divorce rates and belief in God, things like that. And this kind of maps, interestingly, onto the boundaries of Prussia, strangely enough. So when after the sort of the Germany post 1918, really. So parts of what is now Poland were then in Germany, and the Polish borders were further east. So they included parts of what is now Ukraine and Belarus and Lithuania. You can see the borders. These borders still kind of are represented in various sort of maps of attitudes and statistics and so on. So obviously being in these particular countries had a lasting impact. Really.
Cool. So what should we talk about first?
We can discuss the Wagner stuff first. I think it has been really bizarre. It's been really weird to watch the news. Just like this sort of thing could be like occurring within like 24 hours or less. It's seemingly. I mean, I wonder because how do you pronounce? Is it Prigozhin, or am I thinking of like how to pronounce his name wrong?
Prigozhin.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually got that semi right. Like Prigozhin. Like I wonder what sort of like almost like. If Putin had to make like a deal with him to make him stop his movements, I actually wonder what the price of that was. And maybe you can definitely explain this a bit better, because like he seems to at once, I've seen stuff by him saying like the Russian military isn't like fighting this war hard enough. But in recent days, like at least according to like the BBC or whatever, which who knows, they said like he's been saying things like the war is a scam, or it's like designed to enrich like the Russian elite around Putin or the Russian military industrial complex. So I'm kind of confused, like, where does he stand?
But he's obviously a private military company, and mercenaries is always controversial. There's always a bit of instability. On the other hand, in Russia, they have such a bureaucratic military that it's good to have some outside blood and some innovation. And Wagner fought really well in Bakhmut at a very high standard. And so, but obviously the Ministry of Defense wanted to bring him to heel. You just can't have, and Prigozhin particularly is a loose cannon. He's often saying just the craziest things, normally with no relationship to reality. And so, often the pro-Russian people are, oh, it's a psyop, they're playing. But I think it was more of a negotiation ploy. And so recently, the Ministry of Defense said that Wagner is going to have to be incorporated into the Russian military. So in a sense, they were going to nationalize his company that he built, and he was going to lose a lot of leverage and power and money. And so he resisted this. And then apparently a week ago he met with Putin, and Putin said, you have to do it, and he said no. And so he launched this insurrection, which very, very dangerous thing to do, obviously. But on the other hand, I also think that at some point, they all knew that they were going to try to keep this under control. So you made this big drama. And what he wanted was the Ministry of Defense to be fired, the Minister of Defense, and within the pro-Russian circles, they really don't like this guy Shoigu, and so it seems now that there's been a deal. So Wagner's going back to Ukraine, and supposedly Shoigu is going to be transferred at some point. But he also, there's been a kind of a lack of resources. But it's almost like if you work for a big company, everyone wants the resources, to the upper management. Oh, I need manpower. I need more cash. I need, But they have a long front, so everyone's making demands, and so, and also in the beginning of the war, they, with the sanctions, Russia wasn't sure how much they could do and how far they could go, because in war, you don't lose on the battlefield, you lose in the economic realm. And they didn't want to go broke and have to have China bail them out. And so, so everything, is a bit delicate. And this guy's just a bull in a china shop going crazy. And so it seems like now there's a deal. It's been resolved. He's apparently going to go to Africa. Part of Wagner will be incorporated into the Russian armed forces, and the rest will go to Africa. And but yeah, he sees, he doesn't like the strategy that is too slow in Ukraine. On the other hand, he doesn't see the big picture. There's a whole geopolitical picture that's more important than the war. And that's what Putin sees. And so he has to deal with China, India. He has to build, the BRICS. He's building this multipolar alliance. And so it's not just crushing Ukraine that's the highest priority. And so that's the way I see it, at least.
What I find really fascinating about this is how, up until, a minute ago, the question was, can Ukraine pull off a counteroffensive? And the only real players here, Russia and Ukraine. And now it almost becomes moot because, what if Russia just sort of internally falls apart, rendering almost, Ukraine successful by default? I mean, this is...
Well, I should point out, though, that Russia has crushed their counteroffensive, the Ukraine's counteroffensive. It's, I don't know what they're reporting there, but it's been absolutely crushed. They're going nowhere. And so this showdown was chosen by Russia. They played hardball with Wagner. They felt confident enough that they had Ukraine under control and that they didn't have a threat there, that they could bring Wagner to heel. And so, if they had actually started with a real civil war, that might have started to influence things. But even in Rostov
podcast, which is the podcast with like David Sachs Friedberg, Jason, David Sachs was saying that apparently the counteroffensive, of course, he's very he's not, I mean, pro-Russia maybe, but he's very doomerist on the Ukrainian prospect. He said it does seem that counterfaction has not been going well. So, but
disaster.
on the other hand, so, okay, if there is sort of a Russian internal implosion, there is actually concern. James Acton, who's with the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace or whatever, which is kind of one of the more like their main focus is just they focus on kind of nuclear war and such things, security matters, especially him. He said like basically the risk is if the Russian kind of situation does fall apart, there would be a risk of Putin potentially, because basically Putin's red line is Crimea. They really do not want Ukraine retaking Crimea because that's considered.
They won't. They never will. They never will. Believe me. Because they have their naval base, Sebastopol, there. That's what the war is all about. That naval base, and so they will never give up Crimea.
Exactly. So, but if Zelensky's troops actually do manage to get there, which I guess who knows? You said like Wagner, like some of the people are being incorporated, and the leader was going to Africa, but like if essentially this makes Wagner less effective in any way, or Ukraine actually begins to win, there would be a risk if Ukraine does try to capture Crimea that there could be some kind of nuclear exchange potentially. I mean, that's the only situation which this particular expert, James Acton, believes Russia might use nuclear weapons.
Yes, I think in the big picture, if Ukraine actually made it to Crimea, there would be a risk of nuclear escalation. That's true. That's very true. The thing is, there's no risk of that because, and it's not, Wagner's been on the sidelines for like a month and a half. They haven't been doing anything. It's the normal Russian military that has stopped Ukraine in their tracks. But it's not a fair fight because Ukraine has no air power. It's just, sending tanks against, helicopters and fighter jets. It's just not a fair fight. And so they're just getting crushed by the regular Russian military.
Hasn't Russia been fairly restrained in their use of air power as well?
Because of, yes, they've been discreet because of the air defense systems that Ukraine has, but they've been doing a really good job of suppressing them in the last couple of months. And so they've been, especially their helicopters, they've been very successful with taking out tanks with helicopters. And so I think it's the Ka-51 or K-21, something like that. But and also they have these these gigantic bombs, these bombs that they put wings onto, and they can make them precision bombs. And they've been very cheap and very effective. And so the Ukrainians complain we need F-16s and this and that. They're right, they do, but it still won't work. But they need air power. It's not a fair fight. And so, because now the Russian regular military had a very good fight with the Ukrainians now, and they've done really well in defense, that put pressure on Wagner too. Because before, it was only Wagner that were really succeeding. The Russian military, a couple of their offensives were disasters. They were ugly and they just didn't work. And so, and plus they lost up in the north, Izium and Liman. They lost back in last autumn. They lost a lot of land. It was very sloppy what they did, and so, but the esteem for the Russian military has gone up in the last month in response to their defense against the counter offensive. But to be fair, it's not a fair fight. I mean, Ukrainian soldiers are very brave, but they just don't have the right weapons or the training.
Yeah, I remember, Germany was sending tanks, and the U.S. is supposed to send tanks, and then that, I don't know, further talk of that sort of stalled. The F-16 stuff really has gone nowhere, from what I understand.
Well, the problem is, someone in Ukraine called it a zoo, because if you have a military, you want more or less the same equipment. Like Russia, they have, the different generations of the same kind of tanks. But when you have each country, the French, the Germans, the Americans, all sending all these different tanks, you have to learn how to operate each one. You have maintenance for each one, and ammunition. Managing all that diversity of equipment is very difficult. It's not the way you would want to wage a war at all. And so it's very tough. This whole kind of group kind of contribution thing really isn't working.
Internationally, who exactly is in Ukraine's corner? I mean, obviously we are, and Western Europe and all of that, but who else?
Collective West, U.S., EU, Japan, Korea.
Any global South countries?
Not really. Israel's vaguely. They're not full in by any means. They're half and half. No. There's a whole division, Collective West and the Collective rest of the world. And so, generally speaking, no, unless there's a small country that America's bought off, but they're pointless. I mean, you can see it on the UN votes. Actually, sometimes they will get the global South to vote, but it's always kind of an ambiguous vote. It's not really clear what they're voting for. But for example,
well, they're voting,
the
I think, for the principles of like territorial integrity. Like when you see
yes.
When you see the global South vote with vote with the West on these occasions, it's usually because they want to defend the general principle of countries shouldn't invade other countries. But it's not particularly on other elements of the war, like diplomatic or military support. It's just on that principle.
That's true. That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm partially Armenian, and as far as I know, Armenia is definitely not on Ukraine's side.
They're always in a difficult situation because they have Azerbaijan, and I'm not. It gets confusing there. Who's more pro-Russian? I think Russia supports Armenia more than Azerbaijan, but it's very confusing.
China and India do not seem to be at all in. Well, China talked about brokering some sort of peace deal or whatever, but purely as I guess maybe a PR move in some way, or there's some sort of connection to their domestic economy such that they want to see it resolved.
I think it's global esteem. To be they kind of want to be the top dog, and that's what the leading nation would do, but it's not serious. They're not serious at all about it. I mean, and they have a very close alliance with Russia, and I mean they're kind of training Russia how to be a good ally, because China might invade Taiwan at some point, and they're going to want Russia to be their close ally, and so they're working pretty closely together on this. India and Russia are close.
Yeah,
definitely. India and China are not, and so, but
India and Russia have had long-standing ties going back to the Soviet Union era. Like they were completely allied with each other, basically almost. I mean, they declared they were part of the non-aligned bloc, but they were very heavily more pro-Soviet than they were pro-US.
I think they felt the West was more pro-Pakistan.
Yes, at the time it was definitely.
And so, they were much more pro-Soviet Union, and they even recently in speeches they'll talk about how the Soviet Union stood by them while the West abandoned them to Pakistan, and so yes, and also, they're making a lot of money on oil imports and then re-exporting it to Europe. There's a whole there's all these games going on with oil, and it gets refined in India and then shipped to Europe. So, I mean, Europe's paying much more than they used to, but it's still Russian oil. It's quite often like this.
Julian, I know that Poland has been one of the countries that militarily has been most supportive of Ukraine. Some of the leadership has taken a more hawkish stance. Also, like, how is because obviously the oil situation, all this oil is sloshing around. It's probably reaching Europe anyway, even if it's formally banned. Like some of these exports are like formally a no-no. But like, how is the whole because I know in supply chain crisis as well as like central bank money printing are like the major causes of inflation. So like, what's the situation been like in Poland for the ordinary citizens? Like obviously we know what a lot of the political leaders think.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been problems here with inflation, of course. I mean, also, as sort of spoken about in previous episodes of this podcast, Ukrainian refugees, very large numbers, arrived over the past year plus, really. Now we're talking about a year and a bit. And initially, they were welcomed really with open arms by, people who really went to the sort of train stations and went to the border even to take people into their homes. And there's sort of a bit of fatigue set in really after a few months, I think. And now I hear like lots of stories about kind of, like, for example, in Krakow, kind of Ukrainian organized crime. Sometimes you see a Ukrainian car on the road, with Ukrainian number plates, and often it's some kind of black, black sedan. Yeah, it looks like a gangster's car. It's like all 4x4 or something. It doesn't look like an ordinary family car for sure. So I think they are operating, sort of Ukrainian gangsters. I mean, Ukraine was a highly corrupt country before the war, anyway. This is well known here in Poland. I had sort of anecdotes from people who went to Ukraine for holidays. They would sometimes get stopped by the police, who would, for no reason really, and there would be a kind of hint that a bribe would be sufficient to, get the police to leave them alone, right? So yeah, it is a highly corrupt country. Organized crime is a big thing in Ukraine, and now this crime is now here, in Poland. Of course, it was before, but it's now here on a larger scale. But also the refugees, lots of women and children. They are putting a bit of a strain on public services and so on. On accommodation, rents went up. I mean, they've gone up everywhere, haven't they? But this has been a factor in the rising rents, rising interest rates. And then, the Polish government has decided to, I don't know, that it's going to become some kind of military superpower. It seems to think it's going to be. Kind of trying to punch above its weight, maybe not very wisely, in my opinion. And a lot of people have a lot of misgivings about the peace government, really, not only in this area, but many areas. And they see, kind of a lot of folly and foolish policies, really, and decisions taken. And really, the man responsible for all this is Kaczynski, Jarosław Kaczynski, who is a complicated figure because his brother Lech Kaczynski, who was the president, of course, died 2010 in a famous plane crash when he was attending with the rest of the Polish government, really, the Smolensk, in Smolensk, the Katyn, it was the Katyn massacre commemorations, which were being hosted by Russia, and they were flying in this old Tupolev plane, which was used by the government at that time to fly, the government officials around, and of course it crashed. Right, Lech Kaczynski died in this crash, and Jarosław has been absolutely obsessed with, as he sees it, getting to the bottom of this. This, as he sees it, I think, a kind of assassination. So he's got a real grudge against Putin, and also against. He seems to think that maybe Donald Tusk was involved in this. Was a co-conspirator. Tusk was at the time prime minister, and Tusk is now trying to come back into Polish politics, as for the election in the autumn, standing as the main opposition candidate. And there's been a sort of an investigation launched now by the government, Polish government, into supposed Russian influence over the past, decade plus, and many people think this is just a kind of way to try to neutralize Tusk really. They're going to find that he was somehow influenced by Russia, that he had some connections with Putin. Yeah, this is what is assumed. Yeah, that it's just a kind of a con job to sort of to neutralize Tusk.
I was listening recently to I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Thaddeus Russell. He has a podcast called Unregistered, and he hosts live events. And he had he recently assembled Michael Tracy and Max Blumenthal, those gray zone people, are pretty rapidly they veer toward pro-Russia. Max Blumenthal in particular. They're discussing how the Baltic states seem wholly aligned against Russia. I mean, and there's historical reasons for that. But as far as kind of this vaguely neutral, Western liberal analysis of this whole thing, it's a little bit problematic as far as any sort of moral solidarity, because it does seem as if the closer you get to Russia without actually being in it, the stronger the anti-Russian sentiment. So. Does anyone want to chime in on just how valid that is, or do some of these countries have no particular reason to be aligned with the kind of U.S. Western Europe defense of Ukraine? And
I mean, the Baltic nations and Poland, obviously because of the Soviet Union, have generations of anger towards them, and they're almost to the point of hysteria. The problem, particularly the Baltics, are so weak that they really need to tone it down a little bit. Who knows what's going to happen in 10, 15 years if America continues declining. Are they really going to be protected? And so Poland's can defend themselves a little bit more, but they've kind of gone off the deep end the last couple of years. I mean, it's one thing to have historical grievances, but no. I mean, Russia pulled out of all those places after the Cold War. They withdrew their troops, and so voluntarily. Voluntarily, they couldn't afford it anymore. And so maybe a more modest neutral. I mean, you don't have to be particularly friendly towards Russia, but I mean, just all the expressions of hate. I don't know. It's unhealthy, is all I would say.
I guess all save for Belarus, which is essentially Russia itself. I mean, I think politically they're totally.
Yeah. The goal the Russian goal is to combine the three. Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia should be one group. That's the way they see it. Most of Ukraine, or part of Ukraine.
Little Poland earlier, Belarusian, literally, I think in some cases, like the old term for that is essentially little Russian. There was a time when the Russian Empire conceived of, and I actually wrote a paper on this, in particular the concept of cultural genocide and how that's been used by various different groups of people. And that's really actually one of the things the Baltic states have done in recent years. They put up these huge elaborate museums which have really pissed off Russia, as well as just, I guess, people who are upset at the equivocation of Soviet Union with Nazi Germany. They've kind of went all out with these comparisons, and that's also what's led, I guess, Putin to make some of his various claims about Ukrainian Nazis, because there have been all these attempts to rehabilitate these historically dubious characters from Ukraine and some of these other Baltic states, because they were Nazi sponsored, but these people see them as anti-communist heroes. So that's definitely led like that's definitely another finger in the wound between both sides. The fact that they're going and praising all these people who were like literal Nazis in some cases.
Bandera, Stephen Bandera, particularly the Ukrainian nationalist. That's he is a national hero, but I mean, but the thing is, he killed a lot of Poles as well, and so it's quite controversial that Ukraine embraces Bandera like that for Poland too. So yeah, I mean, it's to resist the Soviets, you needed to be nationalists, and the hardcore nationalists aren't always the nicest people, and so they were caught between the Nazis and the Soviets, and so there were no really good choices back in those times. I mean, and for the Baltics, I mean, they have every right to express their cultural heritage, their languages, their history. I mean, no one should be threatened by that.
As far as NATO expansion, since the war began, I believe Finland is the only one that has joined.
They're the only ones that were. Yes, Sweden's trying to join, but Hungary and Turkey have said no so far.
Okay.
But they might get in at some point. It's kind of interesting that Finland got in because Putin must have okayed that, because I think Erdogan and Orban, are kind of talk behind the scenes with him, and for some reason he was okay with Finland, but for some reason he doesn't want Sweden in. I mean, it might be not like that, but I mean, I have a feeling that there's a lot of negotiations going on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. I'm not sure what's driving it. Yeah. I think after the war, they're going to play a lot of games. They're going to put a lot of troops on the Finnish border and kind of force them to build up their troops and to spend a lot of money defending their border. I don't think Russia will not go over the border, but the Finnish ideology of this Russian menace will force them to respond if they have a bunch of troops stacked on the border like that. So it's it's not going to be good.
Well, one thing that just struck me about the Wagner mutiny is it's been very brief, but it's also just a very strange event. It kind of came out of nowhere. They advanced, what was it, like 800 kilometers or something towards Moscow, basically unopposed, shot down some helicopters, apparently lost one truck. That was it. And now it's finished. And it just seems like you could call it, make a John Hughes movie, sort of Yevgeny Prigozhin's day off, right? It's just so bizarre. I mean, it seems to me that's sort of part of our decade